What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Taste Like Music. Jason and Joe here. It is 1974 Deep Dive Week. If you have not seen the channel before, back when we first started, like 4 years ago, we did a whole series, Albums of the Year, where Joe and I and our friend Cramser, who has left the channel, all picked our five favorite albums of each year from 65 up through the present, which was fun and it was interesting. But I think at the end of it, we felt like we didn't get to talk about enough of what we wanted to talk about, and we wanted to dig deeper into years. So now we are spending a couple months at a time listening to as much as we can from a given year. At the end of that, we come here and tell you our top 25 instead of five. So we go a little bit more in depth here. We're changing the format slightly this time around. Instead of having our own videos, we are just going to go back and forth and put it all into one video. And then we'll have another video afterwards talking about some of the other stuff that we didn't get to talk about. So we're just gonna go back and forth. Our favorite albums of 1974. You want to kick it off?
Yeah, sure. I'll kick it off. Yeah, like you said, there's just not enough. Five is not enough for these 70s years. There's so many albums, and I had a hell of a time trying to figure out which 25 down at the bottom here. These are my four-star albums. There's a couple four-star albums before we get to the 4.5 stars. And I had maybe 15 or 20 albums that could have easily slotted in, but I consider a lot of albums here, like I said. Um, Minnie Riperton's Perfect Angel, produced by Stevie Wonder. Rags to Rufus, which featured the massive hit Tell Me Something Good, written by Stevie Wonder. Both very strong considerations, but I'm going in the end with Syreeta as Stevie Wonder Presents Syreeta, which is written and produced by Stevie Wonder. So as much Stevie Wonder as I can get into is what I'm going with. It's a really like romantic, lush sounding album. I think Sarita has a really classic like Motown, Diana Ross style delivery. And I was just craving that in 1974. Stevie's Wonder Love Band, Michael Sembello, Reggie McBride, Ollie Brown, Stevie Wonder himself, all there. They're all excellent. It's just a really fun, jubilant album. My number 25.
All right, cool. I did not get to that one, so right out of the gate.
If you like Stevie Wonder, you'll probably like it.
Well, before I say my number 25, I also had contenders, but really only so many options because I had 26 albums at 4.5 stars and up. So one 4.5 album misses out on the top 25, and that I will give a shout out. That is Fear by John Cale. Number 25 for me is a record that you might be sad to see this low, but it is No Other by Gene Clark. Signed on the back of the Byrds reunion um, by Asylum, but they ultimately underpromoted the album. It was out of print by 1976. It's not quite as folky or country as like most of what he's known for, his other post-Birds work. It's way more lush, way more orchestrated. The musicians are given a lot of room and they really kind of stretch out and make this incredible sound. The songs are really good at the core too. Leland Sklar's bass work on this record is excellent, especially on the song Strength of Strings. So if you don't know that, check that out. Joe's a big fan. We did the whole Gene Clark deep dive. So if you want to hear more about it, you can go check out that video. But yeah.
As long as it made the list. If you had put Fear instead of No Other, I would have lost my damn mind. Fear is in my bottom five for the year. My number 24, I'm going to go with Wally. Wally, self-titled from Wally. It answers the question, what if Rick Wakeman produced an album by the pre-fame Eagles, before they became a-holes? Kind of would get what Wally sounds like. And kind of same thing with like a Kansas. I feel like 74 was like, for whatever reason, country rock groups sort of going proggy. And I don't know how this band ever hooked up with Rick Wakeman. That I was no, there's nowhere on the internet that answers that. But you get like these shorter country rock leaning tunes like Sunday Walking Lady, and I Just Want to Be a Cowboy, would have like these Eagles-esque multi-part harmonies. And then you get 8-minute, 13-minute just jam sessions with prog elements to the Urban Man, opener The Martyr, some great electric fiddle. harpsichord, violin. It's great.
I did hear that one. A lot of talk about it on the Discord, a lot of people digging it. I liked it, but it did not get to the that top 25 kind of level for me. I don't think it even got to 4 stars. Actually, I think it was a 3.5 for me. We can look. The next video is going to be us digging deeper into everything we listen to. Number 24 for me is someone we're going to be talking about again soon on the channel. I've got Grievous Angel, Return of the Grievous Angel by Graham Parsons. This was recorded in the summer of 73. He died in September of 73. This came out early in January of 74. Wasn't a huge hit or anything. It only went to 195 on the album charts, but I mean, that's kind of the story of Graham Parsons. Never really got enough credit in his life for what he did with the Byrds and the Flying Burrito Brothers, his solo records, just everything was seriously underrated. But now people, I think, know better. Emmylou Harris, major player on this record. She's kind of like uh, prominently featured throughout. You also have James Burton, Ron Tutt, and Glenn D. Hardin, all of Elvis's band, providing backing here. You have other guests like Bernie Ledden, Linda Ronstadt, just a all-star cast, but songs are incredible. The title track's amazing. Brass Buttons, $1,000 Wedding is great. Yeah, just an underrated songwriter, great voice, and yeah, really cool arrangements here.
Well, that's a good start to your list. I kind of wish it was flipped. It was two and one because it's probably the two greatest cosmic country albums of all time right there. It's laying down. But at least they made the list. Can't complain. My number 23, I'm going with Diamond Dogs, David Bowie. Uh, this is probably, and not probably, definitely the weakest of David Bowie's glam albums. I think most people agree with that, at least non-cover albums from these mid 70s period. But it's still a David Bowie glam album, and it's still great. Rebel Rebels, Transcendent, one of his best cuts. I love the little Sweet Thing candidate, Sweet Thing reprise. 1984 is great. Very, some disco in there a little bit, like presaging a little bit disco. Sounds a little ahead of its time for a glam rock or a pop star to be doing that kind of stuff in 1974. And it's not as tight as Aladdin Sane. It's not as big and, ambitious as Ziggy Stardust. Production, not on the same level either. But it's still David Bowie in the 70s, and it's a is this my last this is my last 4-star album. It's a 8.9 out of 10. It's right there. Um, it's on my wall. I don't know if you can see it. It's back there somewhere. But a very strong album from David Bowie, of course. It's the 70s.
Well, I might be talking about that one as well eventually, but number 23 for me is Good Old Boys by Randy Newman. Been a while since we talked about Randy Newman. We did his discography way back when. This is a concept record. I guess it's kind of like about the South, scathing criticism of people from the South. But yeah, it's great songwriting. It sounds great. You've got another record with an all-star cast. You've got a bunch of the Eagles on it, Jim Keltner, Ry Cooder, Willie Weeks, and yeah, it's just a great Randy Newman record. I think he's a very, very underrated songwriter. He has a way with the pen, and he says some words you shouldn't on this record, but yeah, just give it a listen.
Yeah, might be talking about that one later. My number 22, it was on the Album of the Week series. We both really liked it. I expect to see it on your list. Jorge Ben-Hor. Is that how we say his name?
I believe it's Jorge in Portuguese. Jorge would be
Jorge.
Spanish.
Yeah, Jorge Ben-Jor. Tabua de Esmeralda. Yeah, we both went 4.5 stars for this. It's one of our favorite album of the weeks that we've done, and I maintain that rating here. It's big and sprawling, ambitious, mix of art pop and Brazilian folk, and I don't even know. I'm not really schooled in all of the things that this is, but it has such a unique sound to these stuffy American ears. It has a very infectious Brazilian flavor, some incredible playing here. It has a lot of elements that you don't hear, but it also brings in some really cool electric guitar on O Homem de Gravata, Florida. Some nice strings on a couple tracks, and almost prog-like arrangements at times. It's just a whole bunch of stuff, and it's completely unique sounding. And yeah, it's just really good. Really, I mean, if you can get past the non-English, which I guess some people can't, but if that doesn't scare you away, it's definitely a must listen.
Yes, agree. And we'll be talking about that as well. 22 for me is one I'm sure you will be talking about later. So kind of in sync so far. 22 for me is Fulfillingness's first finale by Stevie Wonder. Probably the least talked about album from his like what is considered his classic run. I attribute that to the ridiculous album title and it being very difficult to say, and people just don't want to talk about it or have to try to say Fulfillingness is. But yeah, it's maybe not quite some of those other records, but it's pretty close. It's right up there, and yeah, it's got a few of my favorite Stevie songs. Heaven is 10 zillion light years away, I think is an incredible song, probably my favorite on the record. They Won't Go When I Go is great. I love the texture he brings to the tunes with like all the synths and keys and different sounds. The Tonto just sounds so cool and unique, and he was utilizing those things in a way that really no one else was at the time. So yeah, cool record.
We shall be talking about it for show. My number 21, going back to an old favorite of mine, my girl Sandy Denny, like an old-fashioned waltz. And I don't think this is quite as good as her 72 album, Sandy. It's a little more all over the place. There's a couple of jazz like standards that don't quite bring out the best in Sandy. But when she's rocking those folk songs, the whimsical, warm, effortlessly powerful vocals, you want to listen to it like cascading across the verdant fields of the British Isles. And she assembles one of the greatest, assemblages of folk rockers ever. You got Richard Thompson and Dave Maddox and Dave Pegg and Trevor Lewis and all the Fairport Convention guys, and their playing is incredible. Richard Thompson's solo on Solo is one of my favorite solos I think ever. It's just scorching. It's almost unfair. And then Sandy busts out the title track, which if you're in it like a whimsical or wistful mood, this song will just cut you to the core and you will cry like a baby. It is just such a powerful tune, and she sings it so well. I don't know if anyone's ever sounded better than she does on these first two tracks. And the rest of the album, plenty of other good stuff, but even just the two opening tracks alone make this an incredible album.
That is another one that I did not get to. So,
You don't like Richard Thompson that much anyway, so
no. 21 for me. Probably a record in common. We'll see. I got Queen 2. I'm a big fan of 70s Queen in general, but the two that I really hold up like as masterpieces are the debut and A Night at the Opera. And I think the two records from 74, I've maintained this throughout the channel. They're just a little step below. I know a lot of people like them more than the debut, but still awesome stuff here. Brian May's guitar sound is so unique, and I'm not really sure why he ever got away from that sound. I think he maintained some sort of like identifiable fingerprint as a guitarist, but that very layered kind of sound that he did so much on the early records, just incredible. Just proggy and epic, but less self-serious than like all the other, your ELPs and King Crimsons and prog bands of the time. They are also embracing just like this theatricality and like hard rock riffage and balladry and things that other prog bands weren't touching. And it just makes it a very fun record. Father to Son, Ogre Battle, Seven Seas Awry, just all awesome. So, Queen 2.
well, that was my winner in 74 album of the year series. So if it's not on my list, then something has gone horribly wrong in the
Yeah, I
preceding
forgot. I
years.
forgot that.
Yes, this was before I knew of Gene Clark, so we'll see what gets to the top. My number 20 is an album I think it gets overlooked and I think treated a little unfairly because it holds Sweet Home Alabama on it, and I think everyone's sick of that song. I'm sick of that song, but I don't hold it against the album. I think it's a very good, smart follow-up to pronounce Lynyrd Skynyrd, which had all these big epics. This one's a little more Southern rock focused. It's a little less, guitar solo heavy. Really finds the band's, just consolidating their songwriting skills. You get Sweet Home Alabama, which is a relatively good-natured response to Neil Young's Southern Man, and the semi-cliche ridden ballad of Curtis Lowe. It's paying homage to, you know, African Americans who invented the blues, and they're saying, thanks for that. It's a little clunky though. I think that and Sweet Home Alabama, where they get into the more politics and social issues, they don't quite nail that yet. But the rest of the album is great. I Need You might be the most affecting ballad. Don't Ask Me No Questions, a nice cheeky riffer. They do drugs great. Needle and the Spoon, fantastic anti-drug song. And Call Me the Breeze, great cover of the J.J. Cale tune. Even the deep cuts, which there's only a couple. Swamp Music, working for MCA, are great. I love Ronnie Van Zant's voice. He could have been a phenomenal country singer. He's got like that roughness, that rock star streak in him as well. Great howl. So it plays better with three guitars than some twangy banjos and stuff. But yeah, I think it's an underrated, very strong album. 4.5 stars, second helping.
Number 20 for me is Journey by Colin Blunstone, his third solo record after leaving the Zombies. We just reviewed Odyssey and Oracle on the channel, our classic album review series. Ennis Moore, his second solo record, made my top 10 of 1972, and his first solo album, One Year, will almost certainly make my top 10 of 71. So this one is a step down here at number 20, but I think it's kind of a small step. I mean, you still have his incredible voice, which I think is one of the greatest of all time. I think pretty much all the songs are really good. I think the production though is starting to get a little syrupy in places. Um, but still, in spite of that, you still have something like Keep the Curtains Closed Today, which is very minimal and warm and mostly just like an acoustic guitar and vocal and pretty simple. There are other spots where the strings get a little maybe overbearing and uh, a little overdone, but I just love his voice. I cannot deny it. I think it is so good. And it's a really great record. 4.5 stars for Journey.
That one, I don't know how I feel about that one. I need to give it another listen. I only had it at a high 3.5 stars, but I did think it got a little syrupy, little too much of those strings. My number 19 is going to be perhaps the last great Deep Purple album. I don't know because we haven't done the Deep Purple deep dive yet. At least I haven't. You have. You might know the answer. But I got Burn, number 19. The first of the Mark III lineup of David Coverdale, Glenn Hughes, Richie Blackmore, John Lord, Ian Pace, which is a just an incredible lineup. Like as far as like a band roster goes, it's really hard to beat that. Everyone is just a master of their instrument. I think David Coverdale has one of the greatest rock voices of all time. And it is a change up. There's a little more funk coming in from Mr. Glenn Hughes. He harmonizes and he has a couple leads with Coverdale on vocals as well. But it's mostly David Coverdale, manly ass vocals running the show here. I love the just the power in it all. Burn, the title cut, might be a Highway Star sort of rip off, but it sounds so good. That riff is so choice. And there's just this level of violence to the music. It's so heavy, might just take your life, lay down, stay down. So powerful. Ian Pace's drums are insane. Just a monster hard rock album.
We'll keep the hard rock talk going. I've got Phenomenon by UFO at number 19. This is their third album, but it's the first one with a young guitar phenom known as Michael Schenker on guitar. Just totally redefines that band. It's also their major label debut. It's just really tight, concise, melodic hard rock, memorable songs. His guitar tone, Schenker's, is one of my favorite of all time. His playing's amazing. His ability to play fast and melodic and play these memorable lines is second to none almost. It's not my favorite UFO album. I think they get even better from here, but I think their greatness is evident like from the second he joins the band. Dr. Doctor, Rock Bottom, just all-time great riffs. And you also get a pretty sweet Hypnosis album cover with it.
For whatever reason, I never listened to the album before, even though I knew Dr. Doctor and Rock Bottom. And I didn't even listen to it on the deep dive until like a week ago. So it didn't quite have enough time to marinate, but it is one of the albums I was considering for 25. It's right there. So we're gonna have to do a UFO deep dive one of these days.
Oh yeah, I'm game, except there are a lot of like non-classic eras, like a lot of records without Schenker, but
Yeah,
some of those are good.
someday. My number 18, I'm gonna go with Al Green, Explores Your Mind by Al Green. And, this is usually not considered his best. Usually it's, Call Me or something from 72 or 73 when he was just, whipping out these ridiculous albums. But for whatever reason, this one just stood out a little more to me. And maybe it's just a dearth of classic soul albums in 74. Or maybe it's just, a really breezy, energetic, infectious album. Take Me to the River in its original form. I think most people just know the Talking Heads version, but the original here is fantastic. Uh, and it's just an album that's so breezy and like easy to listen to that it's effortless and it kind of tricks you into thinking that it's not as good as it is because it's really good, but it's just such like an easy listen that you're just like, oh, I'm gonna listen to this again. Oh, okay. I don't know. It just I listened to it like 5 times in a row and I was like, this is great, but I don't know. People don't think of it as, the best of Al Green, but to me, this is the highest rated Al Green I've listened to so far. So maybe they're all crazy.
I think I did listen to that, and I have very little recollection. So probably a 3.5 or a 3. 18 for me is Diamond Dogs by David Bowie. Not quite as immediate as the Ziggy era stuff, and it's taken a long time to really get to where it is for me. I used to think even like much lower of it, but it continues year after year to kind of rise the ranks of my David Bowie rankings. I think it's a somewhat awkward transitional record, but for a transitional record, I think it's pretty great. It still has one foot in glam. I think, by and large, it's still mostly a glam record, but it also has like a little bit of that station to station darkness coming in, a little bit of that plastic soul starting to come in. Yeah, it's definitely not as sparkly as the Aladdin Sane Ziggy era. But some really great tracks. Title track is, incredible. Rebel Rebel is great. That's the one that most people know. Sweet Thing, I think, has some of his best singing on it ever. Rock and Roll with Me, I think, is really good. So it's got some great tunes, and it's Bowie in the 70s, so hard to go wrong.
All right, my number 17 was an album I didn't listen to until a couple weeks ago for whatever reason. Maybe because Cramser liked it too much. I got Heart Like a Wheel by Linda Ronstadt. And yeah, why the hell I didn't listen to this before? It's just loaded. Killer playing. You got JD Southern, Sneaky Pete, Cleno, and Glenn Frey, and Don Henley, and Schmidt, and Ross Kunkel, and Andrew Gold, and Peter Asher. And yeah, it's got that, LA soft rock country sound that I love so very much. Linda Ronstadt is an incredible singer. Everyone knows that. Nobody needs to be told that. Um, but I really think the song selection is what puts this ahead of, other albums that, people might consider, cover albums because these are all cover songs. But the way that she takes these songs, there's a one by Paul Anka and J.D. Souther and Anna McGarrigle and Phil Everly and Lowell George and Hank Williams and James Taylor. And she just transforms them and takes them and makes them completely her own. Like I don't think of any of the other songs on this album, even Willin', which I know everyone loves, as a Little Feat song. She transforms it. She takes it. It all sounds like Linda Ronstadt songs to me. And there are no weak cuts, just gems, just gold. And she sings the hell out of them. It's great. It's great. Nothing, nothing bad to say.
It's weird that Cram likes that so much.
It's completely against everything that Cram stood for.
Yeah. Number 17 for me is The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway by Genesis. This is the last with Peter Gabriel. It's a double album. I, unlike you, love Selling England by the Pound, but I think this is really where they perfect the blend of adventurous playing and concept with more accessible melodic ideas. And the structures are complex, but they're also logical. They parts flow in a natural way from one to another. Sometimes my complaint with earlier Genesis, especially like Foxtrot and Nursery Crime and records like those, is that parts they have these long epic songs, but parts don't flow. It'll just change. And I think they do a better job of like connecting all the threads of ideas here. Yeah, and it's a a great prog album for people who aren't prog people. I think this is a good, aside from it being a double album, which might be asking a lot, it's a good place for prog people to start, or non-prog people to start with prog. Counting Out Time, I think a contender for my favorite Genesis song. Great melody, kind of strange lyrics, but uh, surprised it doesn't get radio play, but it could come down to all the talk of erogenous zones. But yeah, it's you know this era, the end of the Gabriel era, the beginning of the Collins era. That's kind of the sweet spot from Selling England through Abacab. I'll even go as far as to say, or maybe even well, could stretch it out further, even maybe.
Okay, good. I'm glad to see that one on there. I'm never sure how you actually feel about Genesis. So good. It's good. Number 16 is one you had earlier. I got Good Old Boys by Randy Newman. Sharpest writing of the year, bar none. The ironic pains to Southern leaders, the gentle mocking of the white man. Um, he does it in a way that's both scathing and sort of like, hey, buddy, you didn't know what you were doing because you're too dumb to really know. And the way he kind of plays both sides a little bit makes it, it's not like he's scolding and yelling at them the whole time. Like there's some depth to his lyrics, what he's writing about. But I really like the way he brings in real events, the Great Mississippi Flood of 1927, real characters like Huey the Kingfish Long. It really just adds to this immersive concept, and it's great subversive stuff. People might not get the joke if they listen to it now, even though Randy lays it on pretty thick. But yeah, there's some coarse, insensitive lyrical content. But you just have to listen to it. It's one of those albums that I think cuts through all of that and is very important. And it's just a great album. And there's also songs like Marie, which is just one of the loveliest torch ballads you'll ever hear. So. He does it all. He does the pretty, he does the political, the scathing critiques. It's Randy Newman. It's what he does.
16 for me, I gotta have my Todd somewhere on my list, and this is where Todd, his double album, falls. In some ways, this record is even weirder than A Wizard, a True Star. He's really indulging every single whim that he has on this record, and it probably will be a difficult listen for casual Todd fans. This is for the hardcore fans, not the uninitiated. But that said, it contains some absolutely brilliant stuff. I Think You Know is incredible. It has one of my favorite, if not my very favorite, Todd guitar solo on it. Just incredible playing, and I think it's a great song. A Dream Goes On Forever is a genius pop song, one of the best of the 70s. And then him doing Lord Chancellor's Nightmare song by Gilbert and Sullivan, and just it's so unhinged, but I love all the sound effects that he's throwing in, and I think it's fantastic. You get a little bit of everything that Todd does. He's often cited Gilbert and Sullivan as his like one of his biggest influences. So uh, him covering them here, I don't know. It works for me, might not work for some, but for better or worse, I love it.
Turns out I'm a casual Todd fan. Uh, yeah, that one did not make my list, but A Dream Goes On Forever could make my songs list because that's a great song. My number 15 favorite album, I got Crime of the Century by Supertramp. And God, you got to talk about what a weird band Supertramp were. They were bankrolled by a Dutch millionaire for some reason on their first two albums. But their first two albums also stunk and they didn't sell. So he dropped them. And then somehow they respond by producing Crime of the Century, which just light years. It's such a huge leap from what they were doing before. I don't really know where it came from. Maybe just desperation on, hey, we're out of money. We're no longer bankrolled by millionaires. Like we got to do something here. Um, but they get it together. It's an art pop prog masterwork, really. Really balances the two very distinct sides of the two lead singers slash lead writers, Roger Hodgson and Rick Davies. And the way it works coherently is just really impressive because they have these like little chipper pop songs, the Starry-Eyed Dreamer, and then the Playful Bloody Well Right, and then these longer epic art pop with multiple movements and with proggy influence songs like Crime of the Century and Asylum. And then they do stuff like Hide in Your Shell, which is very complex but also extremely um, memorable and extremely melodic, and just the way that they can balance all of this and use just kind of regular instrumentation, like a lot of piano, some saxophones, but nothing outlandish, nothing crazy. They're not doing like weird 17th century, stringed instruments or, clavinets from the 1500s. It just all sounds like a very good, tight band making very ornate, complicated music. And it really works. It's very dense, but it also has like this lightness, this poppiness to it that I think is very underrated that they were able to do that so well and marry those very, very disparate sides of the band together.
Number 15 for me is a record that I think is kind of a forgotten record. I think it's forgotten in 1974 by a lot of people. I think it's forgotten and overlooked in this band's own discography. And I think it's forgotten and overlooked in the greater rock and roll history books. But still, one of my favorite discoveries from our listographies. I love the sound of it. It is When the Eagle Flies by Traffic. The songs, I don't know, they feel more direct to me than a lot of other Traffic stuff, but it still has all of the Traffic DNA. I don't know why this one just feels so much more direct to me. There's still really long songs here. I mean, Dream Gerard is like 11 minutes, and it's probably the best song on the whole record. I love Walking in the Wind. Memories of a Rock and Rolla is awesome. It's just super solid top to bottom. Steve Winwood's voice is incredible. The band is just so tight and it's got that great, like, warm sound to it. I love it. Everything about it still blows me away. And I don't know why it's not talked about as at least like one of the great Traffic records. It's people just toss it aside. I don't know why.
I tossed it aside. I forgot to listen to it for the deep dive. I just left it as it's 4 stars. I think it's a good album. I just didn't really have a yearning to hear it again. Figured 4 stars is fine. My 14, you could probably say the same thing about this one. It's not the same album though. It's Get Your Wings by Aerosmith. And this one also seems to get forgotten about in their catalog. You don't ever hear it talked about. You have the Monsters, Rocks, Toys in the Attic the next year and the year after. So this one kind of gets lost in the shuffle. And I'm to blame too, because every time I don't listen to it, I kind of forget about it and start to underrate it. I'm like, oh, did I really have Get Your Wings this high? Like, why is it up here? And then I listened to it, and it's fantastic. Steven Tyler has developed his Aerosmith voice. It kind of comes down from, I guess he was faking it on Dream On in that first album. So you get the real Steven Tyler. He's got the sass to him, but he's not smarmy and bloated yet. The band is super lean. Love the bass work from Tom Hamilton here. Perry and Whitford are great, and Steve Hunter and Dick Wagner, who they brought in to do a couple solos. Um, so that was smart, I guess. But the guitar work all over the album is exemplary. It's greasy and slimy, rough and tumble. And I love Perry's leads. He just doesn't sound like anyone else. The way he plays, the notes he picks, I think is very unique. And yeah, just got some killer songs, same old song and dance. Train kept a rolling. The deep cuts are fantastic. Lord of the Thighs, Spaced, Seasons of Wither might be their best ballad. And yeah, it's just one of those albums that doesn't have a huge hit on it, so it kind of gets forgotten about, but it's great.
I agree. It's one of my highest 4 stars. I did re-listen to it recently to see if it could get up to the 4.5. Not quite, but it's really good and pretty underrated. 14 for me, this is where I have Jorge Ben-Jorge, Atabua de Esmeralda. Yeah, another, great discovery. Thanks to Album of the Week. I have a bit of a soft spot for the MPB, but even in terms of that stuff, I think this is, yeah, pretty near the top of the heap, at least of the stuff I've heard. It's really, really good. There's such a warmth to it, just beautiful, simple arrangements. The songs are, pretty simple, but just gorgeously done. I think the arranging here is fantastic, and the backing vocals and stuff, just everything brings this really warm, inviting vibe. Rolling Stone Brazil put it number 6 all time, sixth best album ever. So, and I don't think that's limited to Brazilian albums. That's just how huge this record is there. So, all the American and European viewers need to get on board.
All right, we're nearing the end of the 4.5 stars, but we're still 4.5 stars for a couple more albums here. And we're gonna do a couple prog albums. I got Red by King Crimson, which I'm sure many people will have higher, 5 stars. People friggin' love King Crimson. And I like King Crimson. I think they have some great albums. This one, ahead of its time for 1974, it's got a metallic, just heaviness to it that sounds, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ahead of its time. This is the final release from the trio of Robert Fripp, John Wetton, and Bill Bruford. And it's the heaviest, most rock forward, much less of that kind of dippy jazz stuff that they were doing on Starless and Bible Black. This is just heavy for the most part. Fripp's guitar is extraordinary. Love John Wetton's bass playing. I love his vocals. They're super manly, which is against type for this genre, but um, it just adds a little more heft to everything. Some nice touches of violin, mellotron, sax really fill things out. And yeah, a bunch of overdubs. It's just such a dense black hole of an album. And the only thing that could bring this album down, of course, King Crimson's freeform workout, their little jazz, whatever, Providence, which is one of the worst songs in their catalog, remains completely unnecessary. But such a killer first half. Red, Fallen Angel, and One More Red Nightmare, and then Starless, the 12-minute epic. Friggin' just drenched in Mellotron rules. So that saves it, brings it right back to the 4.5 star mark.
Not 4.5 for me. It is my favorite King Crimson record, though. But still, they top out at 4, I believe. My number 13 is one of the biggest surprises for me of the dive. I have Just a Boy by Leo Sayer. And this, I listened to his 73 album too, and I need to revisit that because I was so shocked with his performance on this record. He's got the most incredible, like gravelly rock voice. And you would have no idea from listening to You Make Me Feel Like Dancing, where he's like in falsetto the entire time. But he is belting here, and it's so gravelly and just incredible. Really charismatic performances, too. Great control of his voice. He's doing a lot of like vibrato and different kind of manual effects to his voice. When I came home this morning is just one of the most impassioned vocal performances that I've ever heard, I think, and just shredding his vocal cords to pieces. It's just amazing. Not all of it is like hard rocking stuff. There's kind of like some quirkier pieces, kind of like music hall type, circusy, interesting stuff. I saw a performance of him on Midnight Special where he's dressed as like a mime or a clown or something, and so it's kind of like a little bit of a showy performance type of vibe, but yeah, it's super cool and super interesting, and I look forward to hearing more of his records. The album cover is so bad, and I brought that up in our video about bad album covers, and people just were hitting me in the comments that it's like it's based on some children's book called The Little Prince, I think. And I looked that up, and it seems to be the case, but it doesn't matter. It's a terrible album. Why would you make your album cover look like a children's book? It's so bad.
70s were a weird time. I forgot to listen to that album. I wanted to. I couldn't remember what album everyone was talking about. And I was like, is it? Couldn't do it. I'll have to listen to it
It's
though.
cool.
Number 12, I'm going to go with another prog. Well, I don't know if they're true prog. They might be prog adjacent. They're prog in some ways, but they're not all prog. It's Exotic Birds and Fruit from Procol Harum, the last gasp of a once pretty great band. But this one, you never hear about it, totally slipped through the cracks, totally forgotten about. But I pretty much love everything about it. I love the opener. It just kicks ass. Like it's a really great rock song and kind of highlights, a lot like Supertramp. Procol Harum just balanced their two very different sides really well. You have the opener, which rocks, and then you have this just totally Baroque, weird, kind of gothic number, Nothing But the Truth, which has some awesome keys from Chris Copping, who's just amazing all over the album. You have uh, I don't even know what to call As Strong as Samson. It's like this gospel rock number. You got Sneaky Pete popping in with his pedal steel. Got this amazing vocal melody from Gary Brooker. And there's a bunch of great songs, Butterfly Boys. Like everything on here rocks, or it has some like big epic scope that takes from Prague. And the way, they balance the pomp and the aristocratic and grandiosity, the classical inspirations, but still have a muscular sound to them, I think is very impressive.
Okay, my number 12 is Pussycats by Harry Nilsson. This is my biggest faller. This was in my top five and it's dropped to 12. Famously produced by John Lennon during his Lost Weekend, which was much more than a weekend. It's a cool record. I mean, I still love it. Really ramshackle and slapdash, and you can tell they're just kind of like having fun in the studio. But it manages to capture like this certain magic and like it's this interesting snapshot of this period in time. They're doing a lot of covers. There's a couple originals as well. This version of Many Rivers to Cross is my favorite version of that song and one of my favorite songs, period. I think this rendition is incredible. Don't Forget Me is great. All My Life is great. Do Save the Last Dance for Me by the Drifters, which is great. Unfortunately, Harry blew out his voice doing this record. It was never quite the same. He was being egged on to go harder and harder by John, I guess, and it kind of ruined him. But yeah, that's a shame. But the roughness in it does bring a magic to some of these songs. So it kind of works for this record, but after this record, not as much. And I think the reason it drops it, I think the record slips a little in the back. Songs like Loop de Loop and Rock Around the Clock don't quite hit in the same way as some of the other stuff, but I love the spirit of it. It's a lot of fun. So Pussycats at 12.
All right, my number 11, and we've entered five-star territory now. Here on out. I'm going with Country Life from Roxy Music, which is easily my favorite Roxy music. Nothing else comes even to 4.5 for me. And this is the furthest point away from Brian Eno and away from sort of that adult contemporary too much sound of rocks of Avalon. So it's right in the middle. It's the most rocking. It's the most Phil Manzanera of all their albums. His guitar work all over this album is immaculate, soaring and psychedelic and angry sounding. Love John Gustafson's bass work, lightly funky, but heavy as a locomotive. Love the touches from Andy McKay on oboe and sax. There's just enough art school touches from Brian Ferry, who continues to sing a life like he's only known Jaguars and fancy gemstones. Love the opener, Thrill of It All, just monster. The jeering acidic Casanova, one of my favorite character assassinations of all time. And yeah, it has none of that Brian Eno-ness to it, and it's all the better for it. Just muscular art school rock.
Well, I am still at 4.5 for a couple more. My number 11 is Planet Waves by Bob Dylan. Very underrated Dylan album. The only proper studio record that he did with the band. And it might not be Dylan's best material ever, but I think it's still strong material. It's like A material instead of like A plus S tier material. But the band, I think, then takes that A material and elevates it even further and just makes good songs great. And their playing is just incredible. The way they play off of each other is unlike any other band, really. I think they're just great at listening to each other and reacting to what the others are doing. And with a strong batch of Dylan tunes, yeah, it's just excellent. So wish they did more studio work together.
Yeah, I bet people wish that ended up on my list, but alas, I couldn't fit Bob Dylan on another list. We'll have to wait for another deep dive. Maybe he'll get on 69. We'll see. Number 10, going back, well, not back, but I'm going to Richard and Linda Thompson. Richard, of course, all over my list here, but I want to see the Bright Lights Tonight. One of my favorite folk albums ever. I love everything about Richard Thompson. I love his voice, which I know you don't like, but I think it's phenomenal. It's got so much character to it. I love his guitar playing. He's a master of the acoustic. He's a master of the electric. He's got just some absolutely ridiculous leads on here, some just scorching solos. And the way he combines that with, it's kind of traditional folk instrumentation a lot of the time. And then he'll just like bust out this ridiculous electric guitar lead. I think he's a great songwriter. He's mean. He can be sardonic, but also just hauntingly sad, achingly direct. And you introduce somebody like Linda Thompson's perfectly clarion vocals, and it's just the perfect combination. She has a little bit of lightness, a little bit of bounce to things. And the songs Calvary Cross, I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight, When I Get to the Border, End of the Rainbow, Great Valerio are just masterpieces.
All right, into the top 10. This is my last 4.5. I've got Bridge of Sighs by Robin Trower. I love Trower as a guitarist, but I think as great as some of his other records are, I think this one just has that little bit of extra. I think this is his most fiery playing that he ever did in his career, right out of the gate with Days of the Eagle, which is just like coming right for you. Engineered by Jeff Emerick, so it sounds great. Produced by Matthew Fisher of Procol Harum, but the secret weapon, for me, is James Dewar's voice. Just incredible, passionate, soulful rock voice, sort of Coverdale-esque, but I don't know. I just like there's a little more like atmosphere to it even than Coverdale's. Just incredibly underrated singer. The title track is just amazing, a little psychedelic, hypnotic, mesmerizing. the power of Day of the Eagle, the bluesiness of Two Rolling Stone. It's just got it all. I think it's an incredible guitar record and an incredible rock record.
All right, my number nine, I'm gonna go with Caribou by Elton John, which we have spoke about at length on this channel because Jason and I both think it's wildly underrated. And yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say about the album at this point. This is just the band. This is Elton just totally refining their sound to perfection. The drums, whatever Gus Dudgeon did to the drums on this and these other classic Elton John 70s albums, it's just some of my favorite drum sounds ever. The bass playing is magnificent. The guitar from Davy Johnston, just perfect little touches. He's so underrated. The backing vocals, like they're just perfection. Like the way that they all harmonize is amazing. I love the songs. They don't have, I don't know what people think they're missing, but a song like The Bitch Is Back to me, sung with such gusto by Elton John, tongue not so directly in cheek, is just perfect. Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me with the Beach Boys backing up on the vocals are just it's a magnificent song. I love the little trifles like Pinky and Grimsby and Dixie Lily. They just have such a wonderful sound to them. They're different, they're not too serious. And it's great. And if you want serious, you have the closer ticking, which ripped from the headlines, story of murdering a murder spree, which is super heavy and kind of doesn't fit the rest of the album, but that's kind of what makes Caribou such an engaging listen.
All right, number nine, my first five-star record, and unfortunately for Joe, that is, you know what it is?
I can only deem to know what it is.
We got Axe Victim by Bebop Deluxe, a band that we deep dived a year or two ago, and Joe did not enjoy, shockingly to me. I cannot understand why he doesn't like this band, but I love it. I love glam rock. This is right in the zone of glam rock that I like. Very Bowie-esque, and that's Joe's one of Joe's complaints is that it's too Bowie-esque, which I do not agree with at all. I think it's closer to Mott the Hoople than anything. Nelson's playing much flashier than Mick Ronson's, and his voice isn't really like Bowie's at all. Some of his phrasing is, but I mean, so is every glam band's. And I think the songs are just great rock songs, super catchy, adventurous playing, a lot of different types of songs. You have some like really straightforward stuff, some like 50s inspired rockers. There's a couple tunes that are a little more like psych rock tunes, some spacier art rock stuff. And he's just so underrated. His playing is, I think, incredible. And I don't know, you thought it was generic or something, which I cannot understand that argument at all. I just think it's a super fun record and yeah, just great tunes.
For the record, I like the guitar playing. I just thought the songs were super generic and I did not like his voice at all. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And I didn't re-listen to it, so like I don't have a new opinion on it. My number eight, you had this on your list. I got Grievous Angel, Graham Parsons. It was Graham who got me into country rock in the first place with Sweetheart of the Rodeo when he was with the Byrds. Kind of just followed his career after that. Flying Burrito Brothers, right into the solo stuff. And unfortunately, this was his last album released after his death, like Jason said. He was totally just out of his mind on heroin when they were making this. He was barely there, but he still managed to get this out of him, and pretty damn good, in my opinion. Return of the Grievous Angel, Brass Buttons, $1,000 Wedding are just amazing songs. I wish he had more original songs, but he gets some choice covers here. Hearts on Fire, the definitive version of Love Hurts for sure. And Emmylou Harris does a lot of the heavy lifting herself. Some great duetting, some of the prettiest you'll ever hear with Graham and a crack country band, Elvis's backing band. And it's hard not to think like what could have been if he had just been a little more sober, made it through a couple more years. But he has a pretty ridiculous legacy in place. And this is sort of the final, I don't know, cherry on the sundae of his great country rock career.
Number 8 for me is a record that you had earlier. I have Burn by Deep Purple. I freaking love Mark II and Mark IV of Deep Purple, and they're so different from the classic era, these records. And I think I'm pretty close to saying that I like them more than Mark II at this point. Something about like Glenn Hughes and his funkier approach that I think fits a little better with Ian Pace's drumming. Ian Pace was never like John Bonham, like with that heavy backbeat. He always had a bit more swing and like that kind of jazzier feel to him, and I think that works with what Glenn Hughes is bringing to the table. And yeah, it's I think it's just also one of the greatest lead singer switch ups of all time in history. Plus, you get another singer on top of that that would also be one of the greatest lead singer switch ups in history. Like having Coverdale and Hughes is so ridiculous. Two of my favorite rock singers ever. Just a really dynamic 1-2 punch there. And yeah, it kicks off with Burn, which is just like this barn burner straight ahead, like you said, kind of like Highway Star, kind of like eases you into the new lineup. Like this is still like really straight ahead rock and roll, like the old Deep Purple, you know. And then as it goes along, you get some stuff that's a little funkier, a little groovier. But it's all really good songs and great performances. So yeah, great.
My number 7, I'm going with Joni Mitchell, Port and Spark here. Joni goes jazz rock, full band, full sound, but she doesn't lose her lyricism. She's still folky at heart, but here the folk shares top billing with Larry Carlton and Joe Sample, Max Bennett, John Guerin, and Chuck Finley and Jose Feliciano, Crosby, Nash, and Cheech and Chong. And it's just a more controlled, more pop, more jazz, a little less of the free-spirited, breezy, like I'm fluttering along in a meadow, kind of, the vocal stuff that you hate, which I love, but I also think she just does a great job with the more controlled delivery. The more pop songs help me, Raised on Robbery. You have, Flights of Fancy like Free Man in Paris. But it's all kind of grounded by these great electric guitars and the lyrical cartwheeling and kind of out there spaciness. Mostly gone, but I don't think she's boxed in at all, and I think her new sound's just a perfect fit.
All right, my number 7, I'm going to defy the traditional wisdom of Deep Purple fans and just about everybody else and put Stormbringer at number 7. If you have seen my old Deep Purple video that I did solo, you would know that this was coming because I did it then as well. And I mean, I get it. This is even less Deep Purple than Burn was. I mean, if you're here for the Mark II lineup, this is further from that. You hear a synth before you hear an organ on this record, which I guess can be jarring for people in the 70s. And you get a lot more of Glenn Hughes's funk and soul influences coming through. You also get touches of like country rock and like southern rock in spots, I think, a little bit. And yeah, so if you're just in it for the hard rock, this is not going to appeal to you as much. But if you approach this record like it's an entirely new lineup and a different band, I think the songs are great. There's some killer playing from just about everybody on it. The groove on Hold On, I think, is super killer. You also have like something like Highball Shooter, where you still get like a ripping organ solo from John Lord. Soldier of Fortune to close it, I think, is an incredible tune. They do a little bit more of the like vocal uh, trading off here. You get Glenn Hughes singing like the bridge on a lot of the tunes, and he has a song or two of his own as well. Yeah, it's just I don't know. I think the songs are top notch, and no one else does, but I think it's great.
I had Stormbringer at 3 stars, so I disagree with that for sure. But something we agree on, and that is The Lamb Lays Down on Broadway, being a very good album. It is my sixth favorite album of the year. And I am, yes, in the camp, I might be alone in this camp, that thinks Selling England by the Pound too flouncy. It's too Renaissance music. I just don't like it. Give me the double disc darkness and grime that is Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Peter Gabriel would agree with me, by the way. Um, just love the menace. There's something like dirty and twisted in all of Gabriel's weirdly grim, twisted sexuality. Just a grotesque menagerie of characters and creatures. And the band just delivers everything with a harder edge. It's a harder guitar. There's not as much of that, kind of floofy running around on the keyboards kind of stuff. It's all very within the songs and within the structures for the most part. And they're harder edges, more, stops to what's going on. It just doesn't fly off into weird, Renaissance music. It's controlled. It has a purpose, and I think it works. I mean, I like Foxtrot a lot and Nursery Crime, but this is probably my favorite Genesis as far as you know. And they throw in art pop like Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, cheekiness, counting out time. Yeah, I'll take that any day of the week over the Cinema Show or Battle of Epping Forest or anything on Selling England.
Number six for me, we did a classic review of this album as well. I have the self-titled Kiss album. There's one or two clunkers on this, but by and large, I think this is just chock full of great classic rock songs. I think uh, I've heard some people kind of dig at Kiss for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is that like they're not that heavy. And I think there's a misconception because of the makeup that they're like kind of evil or supposed to be like more like in line with a Sabbath or something. But actually, I think their influences are closer to like power pop and glam and Bowie and the Dolls and the Beatles. So yeah, that's basically what you get here, just like tight little rock pop songs. And yeah, they're great at it. And at this point, early on, they hadn't turned into a cartoon characters yet. Like something's still kind of street New York about them. So yeah, I love it. One of the most formative bands in my life, for better or worse.
My number five, formative band for me, Pretzel Logic from Steely Dan. And this is a weird one, I think, in their catalog. On one hand, it has their highest charting tune ever, Ricky Don't Lose That Number. On the other hand, it has a note-for-note recreation of East St. Louis Tootaloo by Duke Ellington for some reason. And it just seems like they were just throwing everything at the wall at this point. This is the last gasp of a band before they completely retreated from real life and just basically became studio creation. And to me, Pretzel Logic always seems like just a really sharp bunch of vignettes and character sketches delivered in this like succulent pop disguise. They wanted their just horrific, horrible thoughts about human nature, just easily digestible, and they're going to make it the prettiest, most ear-pleasing music possible. And they do it very quickly. It's like 28 minutes long, but it's immaculately written. It's immaculately played. Um, you know, it's languid and bittersweet. It's everything. It's funky. It's loose. And they were never quite this interested in pop music, I don't think, again. So it's a must hear. It's Steely Dan in the 70s. Nobody does it better.
Number five for me, this is where I have Caribou. If you saw the Elton John video, that I came close to making this my number one Elton, and I think every time I hear it, it inches ever closer. Song-wise, damn near perfect. I mean, it's got some good hits on it, but the deep cuts are just incredible, like Pinky and Ticking, and I've seen the Saucers are just like those are all some of my favorite Elton John songs. I love the sound of it. I mean, all of his 70s stuff sounds really good, but I think this is up there among the best sounding records that he ever made. And his band, just one of the best bands ever, period. Elton John, Davy Johnstone, Dee Murray, Nigel Olsson. And I think this is where they're like hitting their stride as like an ensemble and playing together really well. And yeah, there's just like almost like a telepathy between them at this point, and it's just working and clicking on all cylinders. And so yeah, this and Dirt Cowboy for me are like the peak of that band. And yeah, I love it.
All right, my number four. This was not my top five last time, but it was like right there. But this time it is. I got Sheer Heart Attack from Queen. And if the cover wasn't an indication, the band just like lying there, maybe dead, maybe alive, just fully engorged on cocaine, wasn't an indication it should have been. You're in for a ride. The album, the second from Queen in 1974, such a ridiculous shift from basically a prog rock fantasy band into the concerns and constraints of the real world. It kicks off with like traffic noise. And it's like you're not in Procession, Father to Son anymore. This is, the streets of London or whatever, kicking things off with Brighton Rock, those noisy modern sounds. You have a song like Killer Queen, which name checks Kennedy and Khrushchev and has that imperial aristocratic piano sound. It's a dirty, messy, crazy place. Tenement funster, flick of the wrist, just, a completely different tone and feel for the band. Hard rock, whatever weird English classic, music they're bringing in for songs like Bring Back That Leroy Brown. The weird voice modulation on Lap of the Gods, like it's almost hard to believe this was the same band that made Queen 2. But they do it so well. It's also democratic. Like they're all writing songs, they're all contributing in such important ways that it doesn't really flow together, and there's some really weird detours in it. But I think that's the fun of a band like Queen, where they can just go off in all these directions. Still sounds great. It still has all the hallmarks. It still has Freddie Mercury. It works. It doesn't work. It shouldn't work, but they pull it off.
Right. My number four was my previous winner. So I got a new winner. I've got Late for the Sky by Jackson Browne at number four. Still probably holds the title for like best, just like straight up songwriting of the year. Jackson's lyrics, I think, are pretty unmatched on this record. Fountain of Sorrow might be my favorite lyrics ever written. I just think that's an incredible piece of writing. And just another, like the Elton John record, another album with an incredible band, just understated and perfect for the tunes and playing to the tunes. And yeah, phenomenal guitar work from David Lindley. Just on the title track, his playing is so good. I mean, it's one of the peaks of that West Coast 70s singer-songwriter sound. You can throw like the Eagles in there or whatever you want to call Laurel Canyon, all that stuff. The Asylum roster, basically. This is about as good as it gets.
Interesting, a new champion. Well, my number three was on my top five for 74. Not a lot of changes here. Fulfilling this is first finale. Stevie Wonder recorded after he was almost killed in a traffic accident in August of 1973. This one to me just has a richer, warmer sound to it. Um, you know, his last album was called Inner Visions, but this album is like his inner looking album. He's grappling with his own mortality and grappling with, things of his soul more than the outside world, which is really what he was exploring on Inner Visions. And it has a great ensemble atmosphere, I think more so than his last couple, where it was very much like Stevie being the auteur, controlling everything. Here, it's got Michael Sembello and Sneaky Pete, Paul Anka, Sarita, James Jamerson, Minnie Riperton, Jackson 5, The Persuasions, Denise Williams. They're all involved. They're all, you know, bringing into the stew, the Stevie Wonder stew, kind of their own personality and soul. And it's less of reliance on that ARP synth, which I love, but I think that sort of more expanded atmosphere that the guest stars bring in, more like real bass on this album as well, and I think that really fills things out. The songs are still great. Heaven a Zillion Light Years Away is amazing. I Love You Haven't Done Nothing. I think Creepin' is his most sensual masterpiece. The backing vocals from Minnie Riperton are just outlandish. I love them. Some of my favorite ever. Too Shy to Say, which pairs my two heroes, James Jamerson and Sneaky Pete, on one track. And I just think it's a really great, somehow overlooked album in 70s Stevie and his classic run.
All right, number three for me is one that you had. I've got Crime of the Century. From Indelibly Stamped to this might be the most a band ever improved between two albums. It's possible. It's really incredible how much better they get from their second record to their third. It's slightly proggy. I think like something like Skull has like a certain like Pink Floydiness to it, but they make that sound even more radio ready, poppier melodies, more concise singles, stuff like Bloody Well Right, but also just like incredibly well arranged, really well played, immaculate production. It sounds so good. It's just like a masterclass in the craft of record making. It is just like uh my favorite kind of records where it's both adventurous and played well and very skilled, but also like not uh, difficult, right? The songs are very enjoyable and good melodies to hook you in, and you don't have to work too hard to get at it. But yeah, it's great stuff. Crime of the Century.
Well, my number two is appropriately Queen 2, which means we have a new winner for 1974. And I still love Queen 2. It's my second favorite album of this year, which I now think is underrated. I once thought it was overrated. If you listen to the Album of the Year series in 1974, I kind of dissed it a little bit, and I got the tongues of the commenters wagging, surely. But no, now I think it's a great year, and Queen 2 is still an amazing album. It's basically a prog album, and somehow I think it gets overlooked. But if you combine Procession and Father to Son and turn Fairyfeller's Masterstroke through Funny How Love Is into a suite with a number at the end of it, it would be a prog album. It would be in the top five on RYM as well. Um, but it just has a feel to it that no other prog album has. I don't want to say it's like a Disney prog album, but it's just so full of like these fun little fantastical creatures and these like pleasing melodies that it doesn't feel as heavy and pretentious as other prog albums. It doesn't have like that same, Led Zeppelin also talks about Lord of the Rings, but this feels like almost more technicolor with how they approach the fantastical, bringing in fairies and ferocious ogres and black and white queens and all of that. So I don't know. I just have this affection for this album more than any other Queen album. I love Side White. You get Brian May and Roger Taylor kind of going off in slightly more realistic modern directions. But then Side Black, which is pure Freddie Mercury, comes in, and it's just probably my favorite side ever. The way it flows from Ogre Battle into Fairyfeller's Masterstroke to Nevermore to March of the Black Queen and to Funny How Love is just perfect to me. I think it's such an amazing string of music. And I love the way it closes with Seven Seas of Rye, a little more raucous rocking. Um, and I don't know, it's just a perfect album. March of the Black Queen is my favorite Queen song that's not Somebody to Love. And yeah, it's just an amazingly overlooked album, really.
Number two for me is El Dorado by Electric Light Orchestra. Just one of the biggest, most grandiose ELO albums, both in its concept and in its utilization of like a real full orchestra instead of just the string players in the band. And Jeff Lynne just takes another step forward as a songwriter and just turns up the tunefulness even more. So like no matter how over the top it gets, it just like remains irresistible because the songs are so good. And plus on top of all of that, you get Jeff Lynne's unique production sounds, which kind of makes it addictive. You just want to hear it over and over again. Can't Get It Out of My Head is just a tremendous single. The way he makes his vocal sound is so unique and different, and the strings and just the bigness of it all. Again, it's just exciting and adventurous, but easy. The tunes are just there, and it's just great.
All right, number one, there on my wall. You probably can't see it. It's no other. Gene Clark. Could be no other. There could be no another than no other. For me, at the top of 1974, no album that I've heard since joining this channel, no album that I've heard in the past, I don't know, 20 years has worked its way into my being like no other. And it just from the first moment I put it on, it just such struck such a chord with me, sent me totally spiraling down a rabbit hole of Gene Clark worship, listening to all his albums, buying them all on vinyl, reading about him, just it's one of these albums ignored on release, completely over looked, misunderstood, underpromoted by David Geffen, who thought it was opulent, overproduced. Yeah, that's why it's so great. And over budget at 100,000 plus dollars. But it just has this amazing sound to it. To me, this is like the most clear-eyed vision of what cosmic country was. This is what, this is what Graham Parsons was talking about when he said great, American cosmic music. He's such an interesting guy. And he had all this success with the Byrds and then completely fell off the face of the earth. Kept coming back, made these great albums again and again, never like got their due. And he thinks he finally pulls it all together, gets a partner in Thomas Jefferson Kay who really has the same vision, this grandiose thing, just ambitious country music that goes beyond, country music into folk and rock and everything else. It brings it all together. And the fact that it's totally bombed really just destroyed Gene Clark and kind of put an end to his career. Um, but it's such a good album. Every song here, when I was listening to it the first time, I heard every song that went by. I was like, this is so good. Like, I can't believe this is so good. Like, how have I not heard this before? There's got to be the second half must suck. Like, there's got to be some horrible tune on here that just ruins everything. And it never comes. Everything is perfect. The glowering no other. Um, some misunderstanding has just incredible bass playing. Uh, Richard Green's electric violin on Lady of the North is astounding. Clark's lyricism is beautiful, sort of mystical, soul searching. The playing is amazing. Ed Davis, just awesome guitar all over the place. Buzz Feitan, Danny Korchmer. Everybody on here is insane. And it should have been a huge hit. It totally bombed, which sucks. But now we know better. And yeah, Gene Clark, no other. 5, 10 out of 10 for me. It's one of my top 10 favorite albums of all time at this point.
All right, number one for me, new number one. Righting my wrongs after snubbing one of my favorite bands through our original series, not giving them any wins. Now they got two. I got The Hoople by Mott the Hoople. One of my favorite albums by one of my favorite bands. I'm not sure if all the songs are quite as good as the songs on the previous record, Mott, but the addition of Ariel Bender on guitar is just like a lightning bolt on this record. And yeah, his playing is so great, really unconventional. Times where it feels like he's just like leaning on the whammy bar and it's just like going out of tune and screaming, and it just works so well. A perfect fit for the band. You also have Morgan Fisher on piano now as a full member. He played a little on Mott, but yeah, it's just the most over the top of all of their records. Just everything kind of turned to 11 at the same time that things are falling apart and lineups are changing. And then, right after this, they bring in Mick Ronson for a couple singles, and then they completely fall apart and get a new singer and change their name, shorten it to just Mott. And you can feel all of that kind of happening here. It all feels very combustible, just like teetering on the edge of collapse. And I think that just makes for the best rock and roll. And it's a great rock record and a lot of fun. And I love Ian's writing and his singing and his delivery and just his charisma. So yeah, it's got to be my number one. Should have been all along.
I forgot about the Hoople. They another one that was like right on the cusp of my list, but I think I had it at like 5 stars for the Mott the Hoople ranking, and it fell down to 4 stars, but still good.
I think that makes 11 in common for us here. That's a lot.
As yeah,
All right. Well, let us know what you think of our lists, what we missed, what we included that we shouldn't have, and drop that all in the comments. Hit the like button, subscribe, and check back when we talk more about all the other stuff we listened to for this deep dive. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.